August 5th, 1962. Vinnie Torino had been running wiretaps for the Chicago outfit for 8 years. That night, he was supposed to destroy the JFK Monroe recording after transcribing it. Instead, he kept a copy. At 11:47 p.m., Marilyn Monroe was found dead. The official cause was overdose. But Vinnie knew what she'd told the president 43 minutes before she died. He knew about the files she'd stolen. For 60 years, that recording sat in a safety deposit box in Cicero, the secret that could topple governments. The conversation that proved Marilyn didn't kill herself. Then yesterday, someone left a package at Vinnie's electronics shop. Inside was his recording, and a note that read, "You have 72 hours." The night Marilyn died wasn't about love. It was about treason. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wire cutters slipped from Vinnie Torino's weathered hands as footsteps crunched through the gravel behind his shop. 3 deliberate steps, a pause, then the unmistakable metallic click of a gun's safety being released. Vinnie's breath caught in his throat. 60 years old, arthritic joints screaming, but muscle memory kicked in as he dropped behind the workbench. The recording was still sitting on his desk, exposed under the fluorescent light like evidence at a crime scene. "Vincent," the voice carried through the thin walls of Torino Electronics, honey smooth with a Chicago accent that belonged to expensive suits and shallow graves. "We need to talk." Vinnie's mind raced. 48 hours left on the deadline. He'd spent yesterday pulling apart every piece of surveillance equipment in his shop, checking for bugs, for cameras, for any sign that someone had been watching him. The paranoia he'd buried for 15 years came flooding back like muscle memory. The front door chimed. They were inside. He crawled toward the back exit, knees scraping against concrete scattered with resistors and copper wire. His fingers found the .38 Special taped under the workbench, old habits from his outfit days. Some things you never forgot, like keeping a gun within reach and always knowing where the exits were. "Mr. Torino?" A different voice now. Younger, professional, the kind of voice that belonged to men who killed for paychecks instead of passion. "We know you're here. Your lights are on." Vinnie pressed his back against the rear door, gun trembling in his grip. Through the gap under his workbench, he could see polished shoes moving through his shop. 2 sets. Maybe more. The package had arrived Tuesday morning. Unmarked brown paper. No return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper like a Christmas gift, was a cassette tape he recognized immediately. His own handwriting on the label, 8/5/62 to 11/4 p.m. Below it, a single sheet of paper with 5 words that made his blood freeze. "You have 72 hours. $2 million. He'd burned everything else from those days. Every transcript, every piece of equipment, every trace of Vincent Torino, the wiretap specialist. But that one recording, Monroe's voice desperate and slurred, telling the president about files she'd taken from Robert Kennedy's office, about names and dates that proved the mob had infiltrated the highest levels of government. He couldn't destroy it. It was insurance, proof, the kind of evidence that kept you alive as long as nobody knew you had it. "Vincent, we're not here to hurt you." The honey voice again, closer now. "We just want what belongs to us." Through the window, Vinnie could see his neighbor's porch light flickering on and off. Mrs. Chen always did that when something was wrong in the neighborhood. Smart woman. Too smart for her own good, probably. The recording had captured everything. Monroe's discovery that the Bay of Pigs invasion was funded through Chicago outfit money laundering operations. Her threat to go public unless JFK dismantled the whole network. And then, in the background, barely audible unless you knew how to listen for it, another voice joining the call. Threatening the President of the United States. His own voice. The shame of it still burned in his chest. He'd been young, hungry, drunk on power and Sam Giancana's approval. When Monroe had threatened to expose everything, Vinnie had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The words had tumbled out before he could stop them. "The lady has an accident, Jack, or you'll be explaining to the voters why you're taking orders from Chicago." 24 hours later, Marilyn Monroe was dead. "Movement in the back," one of the professionals called out. Vinnie's hand found the door handle. The alley behind his shop led to Cermak Road, then to the maze of side streets he'd known since childhood. If he could make it to his car— "Mr. Torino, my employer is a reasonable man. He understands that the past is complicated. But that recording represents a significant liability to certain parties who prefer their business remain private." The honey voice was right outside the door now. "We're prepared to offer you a generous retirement package. Somewhere warm, Florida maybe. All you have to do is hand over the original and any copies you might have made." Vinny almost laughed. They thought there was an original. They didn't know that what they'd sent him was the original, the only copy that existed, which meant someone else had been in his safety deposit box. Someone who knew about the recording but didn't know he was the voice on it. Yet, the door handle turned slowly. Vinny Torino took a deep breath, raised his gun, and stepped into the alley. Above him, Mrs. Chen's porch light flickered 3 times, their old signal from the neighborhood watch days. 3 flicks meant police were coming. Behind him, the door exploded open. What secrets from history's darkest moments still haunt us today? If you're captivated by this web of power, betrayal, and deadly secrets, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're diving deeper into the night that changed everything, and I promise you won't see what's coming next. The first gunshot shattered Mrs. Chen's porch light in a shower of sparks and glass. Vinny dove behind the dumpster as footsteps pounded through the doorway behind him. His knees screamed against the concrete, and the .38 felt foreign in his hands after 15 years of handling nothing more dangerous than soldering irons. The alley stretched before him like a tunnel, 40 yards to Cermak Road, to traffic, to witnesses. He's armed. The younger voice, sharp with adrenaline. "Don't kill him, you idiot." Honey voice, calm as death. "We need him alive until we find the copies." Vinny pressed his back against the cold metal, breath coming in ragged gasps. Above him, Mrs. Chen's darkened window showed no movement. Smart woman. She'd called the cops and gotten the hell away from her window. He thought about her grandson, Tommy, who helped out at the shop on weekends. Kid reminded him of Sarah at that age, all curiosity and questions about how things worked. Sarah. Christ, what if they went after Sarah? The thought hit him like a physical blow. His daughter lived 3 hours away in Milwaukee, teaching 3rd grade, married to a decent man who sold insurance and didn't ask questions about her father's past. They'd barely spoken since her mother's funeral 2 years ago. His fault, all of it his fault. But she was the only clean thing left in his life. Footsteps crunched closer. 2 sets, moving to flank him. Vinny closed his eyes and let muscle memory take over. The alley behind Torino Electronics was 12 feet wide, lined with dumpsters from the neighboring businesses. Fire escape ladder 20 feet to his left. Storm drain cover 10 feet ahead. Loose bolts, he'd noticed it last week. Mrs. Chen's building had a basement entrance, but the door would be locked. Details. In his outfit days, Sam Giancana had drilled it into them. Know every corner, every shadow, every way out. The difference between living and dying, Sam used to say in that quiet voice of his, is knowing which door to run toward and which one leads to a grave. Sam, the man who'd treated him like a son, who taught him to read voices through static and distance, who trusted him with the most sensitive work the Chicago outfit ever did. The man whose approval had meant everything to a kid from Cicero whose own father had died drunk in a factory accident. The man Vinny had betrayed when he kept that recording. "Vincent," honey voice again, maybe 20 feet away. "Let's be reasonable. You have something that doesn't belong to you. We have resources you can't imagine. This doesn't have to end badly." Vinny almost laughed. Badly? It had ended badly 15 years ago when he'd listened to that recording one last time before destroying it and heard his own voice threatening the President of the United States. When he'd realized what he'd become, what he'd helped create. When he'd walked away from the only family he'd ever known and tried to build something clean with his hands instead of tearing things apart with his skills. The electronics shop had been his penance, fixing things instead of breaking them, helping Mrs. Chen program her VCR, teaching neighborhood kids about circuits and resistors, building hearing aids for old-timers who couldn't afford the fancy models. Small work, honest work, the kind of work that let him sleep at night, mostly. He'd even started going to Mass again, sitting in the back pew at St. Mary of Czestochowa, lighting candles for Marilyn Monroe and all the others whose voices he'd stolen in service of men who spoke in whispers and left no fingerprints. A siren wailed in the distance, getting closer. "Shit," the younger voice muttered. "We need to move. Patience, Michael. Mr. Torino understands the situation now." The sirens grew louder. Vinny could see red and blue lights reflecting off the brick walls at the mouth of the alley. In maybe 30 seconds, this would become a crime scene. His shop would be searched, questions would be asked. His carefully constructed life as Vincent Torino, small businessman, would start unraveling. "You have 24 hours, Honey Voice called out as the footsteps retreated. "The recording and any copies. Or we expand our collection efforts to include your family. Your daughter Sarah has a lovely home in Milwaukee. Quiet neighborhood. Very accessible." Ice flooded Vinny's veins. They already knew about Sarah. Of course they did. These weren't street thugs. They were professionals with resources, with files, with the patience to research every vulnerability before making their move. The back door slammed shut. Car doors slammed in the distance. By the time the police cruiser turned into the alley, Vinny was alone with his gun, and the weight of 15 years' worth of borrowed time coming due. He leaned against the dumpster and thought about calling Sarah, warning her, telling her to run. But run where? And how could he explain without destroying what little remained of their relationship? The patrol car's spotlight found him, and Vinny Torino raised his hands, the .38 dangling harmlessly from one finger, dropped the weapon and stepped into the light. Officer Martinez kept his service pistol trained on Vinny as his partner, a rookie whose nameplate read Kowalski, circled around the patrol car with his flashlight dancing nervously across the alley walls. Vinny let the .38 fall to the concrete and stepped forward, hands raised, trying to look like what he was supposed to be, a scared shop owner who'd heard gunshots and armed himself. "Someone broke into my store," Vinny called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "Fired shots. They ran when they heard your sirens." Martinez approached carefully, kicking the .38 away before gesturing for Vinny to turn around. "Anyone hurt?" "Just property damage, I think." The lie came easily. 40 years of lying to cops, to feds, to grand juries, some skills never faded. "They went through my back door when you pulled up." 20 minutes later, after the perfunctory questions and the promise to file a report, the patrol car disappeared down Cermak Road. Vinny stood in his violated shop, surveying the damage. They'd been professionals, all right. Drawers pulled out but not dumped, merchandise shifted but not destroyed. They'd been searching for something specific, and when they didn't find it, they'd waited for him to come back, because they needed him alive, at least until they found the copies they thought he'd made. Vinny walked to his office and opened the safe behind the Cubs calendar, the real safe, not the decoy behind the cash register. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth like a sacred relic, was the original recording from August 5, 1962. The cassette that had arrived in the mail was a copy, which meant someone else had access to his safety deposit box. Someone with connections, with resources, with a kind of reach that could penetrate banks and police departments and God knew what else. His hands shook as he unwrapped the tape. He'd listened to it maybe a dozen times over the years, usually late at night when the guilt wouldn't let him sleep. Monroe's voice slurred with pills and desperation, Kennedy's voice tight with political calculation, and then, cutting through like a knife, his own young voice making threats that had helped seal a president's fate and a movie star's death. The phone rang. Vinny's blood turned to ice water. Nobody called the shop after hours except Mrs. Chen, and she wouldn't call tonight, not after what she'd witnessed. He let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, he picked up. "Torino Electronics." "Hello, Vincent." The voice hit him like a physical blow, gravelly, measured, unmistakable even after 15 years. Sam Giancana was supposed to be dead. Vinny had read the obituary in 1975, gunned down in his own kitchen, 7 shots to the head and neck, just before he was supposed to testify before a Senate committee. The Chicago outfit's most powerful boss, silenced forever along with his secrets. But dead men didn't make phone calls. "Surprised to hear from me?" The voice carried that familiar mix of paternal warmth and casual menace that had once made Vinny feel like the most important person in the world. "You always were my best listener, Vincent, even when you thought nobody was watching. Vinny's throat felt like sandpaper. Sam? In the flesh. Well, not exactly in the flesh. That would be inconvenient for both of us. But very much alive, thanks to certain arrangements with certain government agencies who found my continued existence more valuable than my public demise. The room spun around Vinny. Sam Giancana alive. Sam Giancana calling him. Sam Giancana knowing about the recording. You sound confused, my boy. Let me clarify the situation. That unfortunate business with those men at your shop tonight? That was unauthorized freelancing. Certain parties learned about your little insurance policy and decided to handle matters themselves. Amateurs, no finesse. Vinny found his voice. What do you want, Sam? The same thing I've always wanted. Loyalty from my family. You took something that belonged to all of us, Vincent. Something that could destroy not just me, but everyone who ever trusted the outfit to keep their secrets safe, including secrets about a certain president who's been dead almost 30 years. The weight of it crashed down on Vinny like a collapsing building. Sam was alive. Sam knew about the recording. And Sam knew that Vinny was the voice on that tape threatening JFK. I'm offering you a chance to make this right, Sam continued. To remember where your loyalties lie. Bring me the recording, all copies, and we'll forget this unfortunate lapse in judgment. Consider it a family reunion. Vinny stared at the cassette in his hands, at 15 years of borrowed time crystallizing into this single moment. And if I refuse? Sam's laugh was soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. Then you'll discover that some betrayals echo across decades, Vincent. And the past has a way of collecting what it's owed. Your daughter Sarah, for instance. She has such a promising future ahead of her. The line went dead, leaving Vinny alone with the recording that had haunted him for 15 years, and the terrible certainty that his old life had finally come home to claim him. Vinny sat in the darkness of his shop for 20 minutes after Sam's call, staring at the phone like it might ring again and tell him this was all a nightmare. The familiar weight of the 38 in his lap felt heavier than it had in 15 years, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Sam Giancana was alive. The implications cascaded through his mind like dominoes falling. If Sam was alive, who else was? What other ghosts from 1962 were still walking around with scores to settle? He forced himself to move, to think. First priority, Sarah. He dialed her number in Milwaukee, praying she'd answer. Hello? Her voice was thick with sleep. Of course, it was past midnight. Sarah, it's Dad. A pause. When she spoke again, the warmth drained from her voice. Dad, what's wrong? You never call this late. How could he explain without sounding insane? Hi, honey. The mob boss I used to work for faked his death, and now he's threatening you because I kept a recording of myself threatening President Kennedy. Even to him, it sounded like the ravings of a paranoid old man. I need you to take a vacation. Tonight. Pack some things and go visit your aunt in Denver. Dad, what are you talking about? Now she sounded fully awake and concerned. Are you drinking again? The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. After Elena's funeral, he'd crawled into a bottle for 6 months before Sarah had shown up at his door with an ultimatum: get sober or lose her forever. He'd chosen sobriety, but the damage to their relationship had lingered. I'm not drinking. Sarah, please, just trust me. Take Tom and go to Denver for a week. Don't tell anyone where you're going. You're scaring me, Dad. Good. You should be scared. Please. I'll explain everything later. But right now I need to know you're safe. Another pause. He could hear her talking to Tom in the background, muffled voices discussing whether her father had finally snapped. Dad, I can't just leave. I have classes tomorrow. Tom has a presentation. Fuck the classes. The words exploded out of him. Sarah, people are going to come looking for me, and they might try to hurt you to get to me. Real people with real guns who don't give a damn about third-grade teachers or insurance presentations. Silence stretched between them. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was small and frightened. What did you do, Dad? The question he'd been dreading for 15 years. What did you do before Mom died? What did you do in Chicago? What did you do that makes you flinch every time a car backfires? I made mistakes a long time ago, and now those mistakes are catching up with me. What kind of mistakes? Vinny closed his eyes. The kind that get people killed. He could hear her crying softly, and the sound carved pieces out of his heart. This was what he'd been trying to protect her from. The knowledge that her father was the kind of man who made threats against presidents and kept secrets that got movie stars murdered. Dad, go to Denver, baby girl. Tonight, please. The line went dead. Vinny stared at the phone, wondering if he'd just destroyed the last good thing in his life to save it. He spent the next hour destroying evidence. 15 years of carefully maintained legitimacy went into the shop's incinerator. Records that might lead back to his outfit days, photographs from the old neighborhood, anything that connected Vincent Torino, the electronics repairman, to Vincent Torino, the wiretap specialist. But he couldn't burn the recording. Not yet. It was his only bargaining chip, the only thing keeping him alive until Sam decided how to handle this mess. Around 2 a.m., the front door chimed. Vinny froze. He'd locked that door, turned off all the lights. Nobody should be able to get in unless they had serious skills or serious tools. Mr. Torino? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. I'm not here to hurt you. He moved carefully toward the front of the shop, 38 in hand. Through the display window, he could see a figure silhouetted against the streetlight. Average height, dark clothing, hands visible and empty. Who are you? Someone who knew Marilyn. The voice was closer now, just on the other side of the door. Someone who knows what really happened that night. Vinny's blood went cold. Another ghost from 1962, walking back into his life. I know you have the recording, the woman continued, and I know Sam's alive. But what you don't know is that you're not the only one who's been hiding for 15 years. Let me in, Vincent. We need to talk before Sam's people find us both. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Vinny Torino unlocked the door. The woman who stepped into his shop looked like she'd stepped out of 1962 and aged in hiding, somewhere in her 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the kind of careful posture that spoke of years spent looking over her shoulder. But it was her eyes that stopped Vinny cold, pale green, sharp with intelligence, and haunted by the same ghosts that visited his dreams. Patricia Newcomb, she said, extending a gloved hand. I was Marilyn's publicist, her friend. The name hit Vinny like a sledgehammer. He'd heard it on the recordings, background voices discussing interviews and photo shoots, the business machinery that surrounded Monroe like armor that ultimately failed to protect her. But Patricia Newcomb was supposed to be long gone, disappeared from Hollywood right after Monroe's death, never to be heard from again. You're supposed to be dead? Missing? Yes, that was the idea. Patricia moved past him into the shop, her eyes scanning the shadows with professional paranoia. Amazing how easily a person can vanish when the alternative is being silenced permanently. Vinny locked the door behind her, his mind reeling. 2 ghosts from 1962 in one night. How many others were still out there, hiding in plain sight? You look surprised, Vincent. May I call you Vincent? After all, I've been listening to your voice for 15 years. She turned to face him, and her expression was colder than winter in Chicago. Every time I play that recording, I hear you. The voice that sealed Marilyn's fate. The accusation hung between them like a loaded gun. Vinny felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders, the same guilt that had driven him from the outfit, that had made him choose fixing radios over breaking lives. You think I killed her. I think you helped create the circumstances that made her death inevitable. Patricia's voice was steady, prosecutorial. That recording you made, Marilyn and Jack's final conversation, it wasn't just pillow talk, was it? She'd discovered something about the outfit's connections to the White House. Vinny's throat felt like sandpaper. What do you know? I know Marilyn had been asking questions, dangerous questions about why Jack was pulling back from the Bay of Pigs veterans, why he was suddenly talking tough about organized crime. She wasn't as naive as everyone thought, Vincent. She understood that pillow talk has consequences. The memories came flooding back, Monroe's voice on that final call, sharp despite the pills, demanding answers from Kennedy. They're using you, Jack. Can't you see that? Sam Giancana thinks he owns you. And Kennedy's response, cold and political, What I see is a woman who knows too much about things that don't concern her. That's when Vinny's young, stupid voice had cut through the line. When he'd made the threat that changed everything. She called me that night, Patricia continued, settling into the chair beside his workbench like she planned to stay. After her call with Jack, she was terrified, Vincent. Not just hurt, terrified. She said someone had been listening to all their conversations, that she could hear breathing on the line. The tap was authorized. By whom? Sam Giancana? The CIA? Someone else entirely? Patricia leaned forward, her green eyes boring into him. Because here's what I learned in 15 years of running, Vincent. That recording you kept isn't just evidence of an affair. It's evidence of treason. The word hit him like a physical blow. Treason. He'd always known what he'd done was wrong, criminal, but treason? That carried implications that made his blood run cold. Kennedy was going to expose the outfit's role in the assassination attempts on Castro, Patricia continued relentlessly. He was going to reveal how deep organized crime had penetrated his own administration. Marilyn found out, and that made her a liability to everyone, the outfit, the CIA, maybe even people in Kennedy's own circle who couldn't afford the exposure. Vinny's hands were shaking again. Why are you telling me this? Because Sam Giancana isn't the only one who wants that recording, Vincent. There are others, people who've spent 30 years covering up what really happened, people who will kill anyone who threatens to expose the truth. What truth? But even as he asked, Vinny already knew, the terrible knowledge he'd been carrying like a tumor in his chest for 15 years. Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. The truth about who really gave the order to kill Marilyn Monroe, and why your voice threatening the president was exactly what they needed to set everything in motion. Before Vinny could respond, the lights went out. Every street light on the block, every neon sign, every electric glow that had been holding back the darkness. The blackout was too complete, too perfect to be an accident. They found us, Patricia whispered in the darkness. Vincent, do you still have that gun? Outside, car doors slammed shut with military precision. Multiple vehicles, multiple footsteps. These weren't the amateur freelancers from earlier tonight. How many rounds? Patricia's voice was calm, professional. 6. That's not enough. Not nearly enough. In the absolute darkness, Vinny heard Patricia moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years expecting this moment. A soft click, then the barely perceptible sound of metal sliding against leather. You're armed, he whispered. I've been armed for 15 years. Her voice came from a different position now. She'd moved to the window. Vincent, I need you to listen very carefully. Everything I told you about that night, about Marilyn, about Kennedy, about Sam's involvement, it's all true. But there's something else. Something I've been waiting 15 years to tell you. The footsteps outside were closer now, methodical, surrounding the building. Vinny could hear the subtle sounds of professionals setting up a perimeter, the scrape of a ladder against brick, the whispered coordinates of a tactical team. Patricia, whatever you're going to say, the recording you kept, Vincent, the one you've been carrying like a cross for 15 years. In the darkness, her voice was steady as a surgeon's hand. You never actually listened to the whole thing, did you? Vinny's blood turned to ice. What? You heard Marilyn and Jack arguing. You heard her threatening to expose the outfit's connections to the White House. You heard your own voice cutting through the line, making threats. Patricia's voice was getting closer, moving toward him through the darkness. But you never listened to what came after. After what? But even as he asked, Vinny felt the first cold fingers of understanding creeping up his spine. After your voice, Vincent, after you threatened the president, there's another voice on that recording. Someone else was on the line that night. Someone who heard everything, the affair, the political secrets, your threats. Someone who used all of it to orchestrate what happened next. The truth hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. 15 years of guilt, 15 years of believing he'd helped kill Monroe with his stupid young threats, and he'd never heard the complete recording. Who? The word came out as barely a whisper. The same person who arranged for that recording to be in your hands in the first place. The same person who made sure you'd keep it as insurance, never knowing you were holding evidence of your own manipulation. Patricia was beside him now, her breath warm against his ear. The same person who's been using you as a patsy for 30 years. Through the shop window, Vinny could see the glow of tactical lights painting the neighboring buildings. They were running out of time. Sam Giancana never ordered you to make that recording, did he, Vincent? The question landed like a physical blow. In the darkness, 15 years of carefully constructed memories began crumbling like a house of cards. He'd always assumed the order came from Sam. Everyone knew Sam wanted dirt on Kennedy. It made perfect sense, except he'd never actually been given that order. Someone else told you to tap that line, Patricia continued relentlessly. Someone who knew exactly what you'd hear. Someone who needed a young, ambitious wiretap specialist to create evidence of his own complicity. No, but the word came out weak, uncertain, because now he was remembering that night differently. Not the order he'd received, but the suggestion, the casual mention that Kennedy and Monroe's calls might contain useful intelligence, the way he'd been positioned to take the fall if anything went wrong. Who gave you the order, Vincent? The question hung in the darkness like an executioner's blade. And suddenly, Vinny knew. The voice on the phone earlier tonight, gravelly, measured, paternal. The voice he'd trusted without question for 15 years. Sam Giancana hadn't just faked his death. He'd faked being Vinny's protector. Sam, Vinny whispered. Sam set me up. From the very beginning, Patricia confirmed. He needed someone to make those threats against Kennedy. Someone whose voice would be on that recording, creating evidence that the outfit was targeting the president. Evidence that could be used to justify other actions. The conspiracy unfolded in Vinny's mind like a terrible flower blooming. Sam hadn't been protecting him by keeping him alive. Sam had been saving him for this moment. The moment when Vinny would finally understand that he'd been a pawn in a game that stretched from 1962 to tonight. Outside, a voice boomed through an electronic megaphone. Vincent Torino, this is the FBI. You're surrounded. Exit the building with your hands visible. Patricia's laugh was soft and bitter in the darkness. The FBI. Of course. Sam always did prefer official channels when possible. They'll kill us both, Vinny said. Maybe. But first, they need to make sure you haven't told anyone else what's on that recording. The complete recording. Patricia pressed something cold and metallic into his hand. Not a gun, but a cassette tape. This is what you should have been listening to for 15 years, Vincent. The real evidence. The voice that proves Sam Giancana didn't just help kill Marilyn Monroe. He orchestrated the entire conspiracy to frame the outfit for threatening Kennedy, giving certain government agencies all the justification they needed to handle the Marilyn problem permanently. The megaphone crackled again. You have 60 seconds to exit the building. Patricia's voice cut through the darkness one final time, cold as winter and sharp as a blade. The only question now, Vincent, is whether you're still Sam's useful idiot or if you're finally ready to fight back. Vinny's fingers closed around the cassette tape, the plastic edges sharp against his palm. 30 years of lies crystallized into this moment, this choice. Through the shop window, tactical lights swept the street like mechanical vultures. Fight back how? He whispered. We're surrounded. Patricia moved to his workbench, her hands finding tools in the darkness with practiced efficiency. Your shop backs up to Cicero Creek, doesn't it? The storm drain system? That tunnel's been sealed for years. Has it? The sound of metal against metal. She was working on something. Or did someone just want people to think it was sealed? Someone who might need an escape route from this particular building. The implication hit him like cold water. Sam's protection hadn't just been about keeping Vinny alive. It had been about keeping him accessible. Even his choice to buy this shop, in this location, had been orchestrated. Jesus Christ. How long has he been playing me? Since 1962, maybe longer. Patricia's voice carried the weight of her own revelations. I spent 15 years thinking I was hiding from the outfit. Turns out I was hiding from the man who convinced everyone else the outfit was the real threat. Outside, the FBI countdown continued. 30 seconds, Mr. Torino. Vinny pressed the cassette tape against his chest, feeling his heart hammer against it. Why now? Why is Sam making his move after all these years? Because someone else found out. Someone who could expose the whole conspiracy. Patricia's hands stilled on her work. Your daughter, Vincent. The words hit him like a physical blow. Sarah doesn't know anything. She's a teacher, smart woman, curious, and she's been asking questions about her father's past ever since that article came out about the church committee investigations. Patricia turned toward him in the darkness. Sam knows she's been digging. He knows she's close to finding something that could unravel 30 years of carefully constructed lies. Vinny felt the world tilting beneath his feet. All his efforts to protect Sarah, to keep her away from his past, and she'd been walking toward the truth on her own. The threatened phone call earlier wasn't just about controlling him. It was about eliminating a loose thread. "She called me tonight," he said, the words coming out strangled, "after I warned her to leave town. She hung up angry." "Good. Angry means she's not coming here." Patricia's voice carried a bitter edge of hope. "But Vincent, if we don't make it out of tonight, she'll keep looking for answers, and eventually she'll find the wrong ones." The FBI voice boomed again. "Time's up. We're coming in." Patricia grabbed his arm. "The storm drain, behind your parts storage. There's a false panel. Sam had it installed when you bought this place, didn't he? Part of the security upgrades he suggested?" Vinny's mind reeled back through the years. The workmen who'd come after he'd signed the lease, the improvements that Sam had insisted on paying for. At the time, it had seemed like generosity. Now he understood it for what it was, preparing the cage. "He wanted me trapped here." "No, Vincent. He wanted you to think you were trapped here. The exit was always there. He just needed you to be desperate enough to use it." Patricia pressed something into his other hand, a small device, warm from her body heat. "Portable cassette player. When we're out of here, you're going to listen to that complete recording. You're going to hear the voice that's been pulling your strings for 30 years. The front door exploded inward with the precision of a tactical breach. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness like searchlights, accompanied by shouted commands and the thunder of boots on wooden floors." Patricia pulled him toward the back of the shop, past workbenches and shelves of electronic components. Her hands found the wall panel immediately. She'd known exactly where to look. "You've been here before," Vinny realized. "I've been watching this place for 15 years, Vincent, waiting for the night Sam would finally make his move." The panel swung open, revealing a tunnel that smelled of damp concrete and decades-old secrets. "I've been waiting for the night you'd finally be ready to learn the truth." Behind them, the FBI team swept through the shop with military efficiency. In moments, they'd reach the storage room. Patricia stepped into the tunnel, then turned back to him. In the faint light from the tactical beams, her face looked carved from marble, beautiful and terrible and absolutely certain. "This is it, Vincent. The moment you stop being Sam Giancana's victim and start being his worst nightmare." She held out her hand. "But only if you're ready to hear what your voice really helped cover up that night. Only if you're ready to learn who else was supposed to die." Behind them, flashlight beams swept closer. Ahead lay 15 years of truth, waiting in the darkness of the tunnel. Vinny Torino took her hand and stepped into the unknown, swallowing their footsteps in dampness and decay. Behind them, the FBI team's shouts echoed through Vincent's shop, growing fainter with each desperate step forward. Patricia moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every twist, every crumbling seam in the concrete. "How far?" Vinny gasped, his 58-year-old legs already protesting. "Half a mile to the creek junction. Then we surface." Patricia's voice carried no breathlessness, no fear, only the cold efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for 15 years. "But first, you need to listen." She stopped abruptly, pressing the portable cassette player into his hands. In the absolute darkness of the tunnel, the small device felt like a weapon. Now? Here? Especially here. Especially now. Patricia's fingers found his in the blackness, guiding him to the play button. "Because in 10 minutes, we're going to surface into Sam Giancana's world. And you need to understand exactly who you're facing." Vinny's thumb trembled over the button. 30 years of carefully buried truth waited in that small plastic rectangle. 30 years of guilt and manipulation and lies. He pressed play. The recording crackled to life, tinny and distant through the small speakers. First came the familiar voices, Monroe and Kennedy, their final conversation playing out like a Greek tragedy. Marilyn's voice, sharp despite the pills. "They're using you, Jack. Can't you see that? Sam Giancana thinks he owns you." Kennedy's response, cold and dismissive. "What I see is a woman who knows too much about things that don't concern her." Then came Vinny's own voice. "Young, stupid, drunk on power, Mr. President. You might want to reconsider your tone. People who disrespect their friends sometimes find themselves without protection." But the tape didn't stop there. After a moment of silence, another voice cut through the static. Familiar, trusted, the voice that had guided Vinny's life for 3 decades. "Very good, Vincent. Perfect delivery. Mr. President, I hope you understand the position you're in now." Sam Giancana's voice, calm as a funeral director's. "Sam?" Kennedy's shock was audible even through the decades-old recording. "How long have you been—" "Long enough to hear everything, Jack. Long enough to understand that your girlfriend has become a liability to both of us. Vincent here just provided the perfect solution." Vinny felt his legs give out. He slumped against the tunnel wall, the cassette player falling from nerveless fingers. Patricia caught it before it hit the concrete. "Keep listening," she said, her voice gentle for the first time since he'd met her. "This is extortion," Kennedy's voice, smaller now, frightened. "This is politics," Sam replied. "Vincent's threat gives us both what we need. You get plausible deniability when Marilyn has her unfortunate accident. I get a useful recording that proves the outfit was targeting you. Everyone wins. Everyone except Marilyn," Kennedy whispered. "Everyone who matters, Jack Vincent. You did beautifully. Make sure that tape gets filed somewhere safe. Someday we might need evidence that the outfit was threatening the president." The recording ended with a click that echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Vinny stared into the darkness, his entire understanding of reality crumbling like old concrete. "He used me to threaten Kennedy. Then he used my threat as evidence against the outfit, while positioning himself as the reasonable voice trying to control the dangerous elements." Patricia's voice carried 30 years of accumulated rage. "Sam Giancana didn't just fake his death, Vincent. He faked being the victim of his own conspiracy." The implications crashed over Vinny like a tide of ice water. Every mob investigation that had focused on the outfit's Kennedy connections, every documentary that painted Sam as the dangerous criminal element, every narrative that positioned the government as the victim of organized crime's overreach, all of it orchestrated by Sam himself. "Marilyn," Vinny whispered, "was killed to create a crisis that would justify everything that came after. The crackdowns on organized crime, the increased surveillance powers, the elimination of anyone who knew too much about what really happened." Patricia's voice hardened. "Including, eventually, you." Behind them, distant voices echoed through the tunnel. The FBI had found the entrance. But why wait 30 years? Because Sam needed time to build his new identity. Time to position himself as an elder statesman instead of a criminal. Time to make sure everyone who could contradict his story was either dead or discredited. Patricia pulled him to his feet. "Everyone except you, Vincent. You were the one loose thread he couldn't cut without risking exposure." They began moving again, faster now, Patricia leading him through turns he couldn't see. The voices behind them grew closer, until Sarah started asking questions, Vinny realized. Until Sarah started asking questions, Patricia confirmed, and Sam realized he couldn't control 2 generations of Torinos, so he decided to clean house. Ahead, a faint gray light appeared, the tunnel's end. Freedom, or another trap. "Patricia," Vinny said as they approached the exit, "when we get out of here, when this is over, how do we prove any of this?" Her laugh was soft and deadly in the darkness. "We don't prove it, Vincent. We broadcast it. WQED went dark in 1979, she explained, producing a key that opened the building's side door with suspicious ease. "But the equipment still works. Sam never bothered to have it destroyed, probably figured no one would be stupid enough to use it." Inside, dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through broken windows. The broadcast booth looked like a museum exhibit from another era, but when Patricia flipped a series of switches, The ancient board hummed to life with surprising clarity. "Emergency frequency," she said, adjusting dials with practiced precision. "Every law enforcement agency, every news outlet, every government office between here and Washington will hear this." Vinny slumped into the announcer's chair, the cassette player heavy in his hands. Through the booth's window, he could see the eastern horizon beginning to blush with dawn. Somewhere in this awakening world, his daughter Sarah was probably drinking coffee, getting ready for another day of teaching 8th graders about history. She had no idea that history was about to be rewritten. "What if they cut the transmission?" "They'll try." Patricia's smile was sharp as broken glass. "But I've spent 15 years preparing for this moment. There are backup stations, backup recordings, backup plans. Sam taught me well, maybe too well." The recording played one more time through the station's speakers, Sam Giancana's voice filling the dusty air with 30-year-old lies. When it ended, Patricia nodded toward the microphone. "Your turn, Vincent. Tell them what you know." Vinny looked at his reflection in the booth's dark window, a 58-year-old man who'd spent half his life carrying someone else's guilt. When he spoke, his voice was steady for the first time in decades. "My name is Vincent Torino. On August 5, 1962, I recorded a phone conversation between President Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. What I'm about to broadcast is the complete, unedited version of that recording, including the voice of the man who orchestrated both Monroe's death and the conspiracy that followed." He pressed play, and Sam Giancana's carefully hidden words spilled out across the airwaves like poison finally purged from a wound. By the time the recording ended, the first news vans were already pulling up outside the station. 3 months later, Vinny sat in a different kind of booth, this one in Minnelli's Diner on the outskirts of Springfield, where Sarah had driven down from Chicago to meet him. The lunch crowd provided cover for their conversation, though the federal marshals at the corner table weren't fooling anyone. "The Senate committee wants to interview you again next week," Sarah said, stirring sugar into her coffee with mechanical precision. She'd grown thinner since the story broke, her eyes carrying the weight of learning that her father's guilt had been carefully manufactured by a dead man who wasn't actually dead. "I know." Vinny picked at his sandwich, appetite still a stranger to him. "Patricia says they're close to finding Sam's new identity. Apparently he's been living as a retired businessman in Scottsdale for 20 years. Sarah looked up from her coffee. "Do you hate him? For what he did to you? To our family?" Vinny considered the question, watching steam rise from his untouched soup. "I used to think I hated myself. For 30 years I carried the weight of thinking I'd helped kill that woman. Now I know I was just a stupid kid who got used by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate guilt and fear." He met his daughter's eyes. "I guess what I feel now isn't hate. It's tired, just bone-deep tired." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "The therapist says that's normal. Says it'll take time to separate what you actually did from what he made you believe you'd done." Through the diner's window, Vinny could see the unmarked cars that had become a permanent fixture of his life. The Justice Department called it protective custody. He called it the price of finally telling the truth. "Do you think she knew?" Sarah asked quietly. "Marilyn, do you think she understood what was happening to her?" Vinny thought about that final recording, about Monroe's voice cutting through the pills and the fear to warn a president who was already too compromised to save her. "I think she understood more than any of us. I think that's why they had to kill her." The marshals were already standing, checking their watches. Time to go, time to return to the safe house and the endless depositions and the slow, grinding machinery of justice finally turning after 30 years of carefully maintained lies. As they walked to their separate cars, Sarah turned back to him one last time. "Dad, that night you called to warn me, you saved my life. Whatever else happened, whatever Sam made you believe about yourself, you protected your family when it mattered." Vinny watched his daughter drive away, then climbed into the back seat of the federal sedan. As Springfield faded in the rearview mirror, he pulled out the small recorder Patricia had given him, not for evidence this time, but for memory. He pressed record and began speaking into the gathering dusk. "Day 93 of telling the truth. I'm starting to remember who I used to be before Sam Giancana made me into someone else. It's a strange feeling, being real again." The car turned toward another safe house in another anonymous town, carrying a man who'd finally learned the difference between guilt and innocence, between truth and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. Outside the window, the last light of day painted the sky the color of old memories, finally fading into something that might eventually become peace.